There's been such great conversation already about the current state of the federal workforce. And of course, this panel is called The New Face of the Federal Workforce. So I wanted to take just a minute to set the stage with some statistics that you are all probably very familiar with, but I think it's helpful to understand what we currently look like. So based on 2018 full-time equivalent numbers, in the executive branch alone, there are just over 2 million federal workers. When you add in the ledge branch, the judicial branch, and the postal service, you get to 2.7 million. But those numbers have been very steady since about the 1990s as the US population has grown. So the federal workforce is a smaller share relative to the total population. But they've been augmented by the growth of the contract and grant employee population, which now numbers about 5 million. So you add all that together, somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.7 million people supporting the functions of the federal government. You just heard some conversation about the aging of the federal workforce. About a third of federal workers are in their 50s, which doesn't feel old to me, but apparently is. And another 13% over the age of 60, and only 6% under the age of 30, compared with 24% of the US national workforce that's under the age of 30. Relative to ethnic diversity, based on 2016 numbers, 64% declared that they were of white origin, 19% Black, 9% Latino, 6% Asian. You can tell pretty quickly that that doesn't reflect the national demographics. Gender diversity, 57.5% male, 42.5% female. Somewhere between 60 and 80% of the federal workforce lives outside the DC metropolitan area, even though we find that hard to believe here. So what, right? So what? So we just had Mr. Dodaro up here. There's a recent quote from GAO when they talk about the high-risk list and the management of the federal workforce that says, agencies face a potential risk related to retirement. If turnover is not strategically managed and succession plans put in place, gaps can develop in an agency's institutional knowledge and leadership. That implies a strong possibility of mission failure, because our new face of the federal workforce still looks a lot like the old face of the federal workforce. We've got 4 great panelists here today who all represent different segments of that workforce to help us think about how we might give the face of the federal workforce a lift. I'm not going to quit my day job. So I'd like to start with Michelle Amante. Michelle, the Partnership for Public Service regularly tracks issues related to the federal workforce. So what do you see as the biggest challenges facing the federal civil service today?
So I think there are 2 that the partnership often hones in on. One is the stat that you already mentioned, that less than 6% of the federal workforce is under 30. And that stat is even more stark when you look at the tech workforce, where you're 5 times more likely to have someone over 60 than under 30. And this is really problematic. So we focus in on that one. And then we also focus in on the retention issue, which came up in one of the panels this morning. And so I think when you think about how do you attract young people to government, there's a lot of issues. One of them is the government is a branding problem, right? The good news is that young people really care about mission, right? In fact, a lot of them care more about mission than money. So how do we capitalize on that, right? How do we make them want to come work for the government? And we just have a really hard time getting that message out. And so for those of you who don't know, the partnership, next week we'll have the Service to America Medals Gala. It's where we honor some of the top career civil servants in government. And so that's an opportunity for us to get the word out about what are the innovative practices going on across government? What are the jobs in government that you can't do anywhere else? I don't think that message gets out there. I think about, Camille was up here earlier, and the things that they do at NIH and the research that they do there, you can't do anywhere else in the world. But that message isn't getting out there. So we try to focus on things like that. Obviously, the hiring process is very complicated, and we all know the struggles with that. There has been some new movement on that. Agencies can now share certs, and OPM is trying to make some progress on pathways, so there's things going on there. And then also internships are a big problem. You know, we've got agencies, most of them have the structure to make that happen, but they're not actually utilizing it. So exposing young people, I think, to agencies and government is a good way to get them in. On the retention issue, I think another thing when we're thinking about the younger workforce is like having a cohort or having kind of a tribe is really important. So we hire young people in and then we stick them in a cube. Say good luck. Have fun. Nobody wants to work that way, and particularly younger people. So thinking about how can they build community, how can you regularly connect them to the mission, going back to that mission connection. You know, particularly some of these entry-level jobs, they feel very far away from that. So like, how can you remind them of why they took the job in the first place? And then I think this also came up earlier, just like a lack of career pathing. So they come into government, like what is their path forward? How can they get to the next step and the step after that? So I think I could go on and on, but I think those are some of the kind of high-level issues that we are focused on at the partnership and we're thinking about on a pretty regular basis.
Great, thank you. And so Michelle, you're a cyber expert yourself, and you represent young government leaders as the president of that organization. So what's on your members' minds when they think about their future in the federal workforce?
Yeah, there's a lot of what you talked about, right? So we always talk about the aging workforce and how they're retiring at a crazy rate, and we are still 6%, right, is the age less than 30. That's scary in my mind. You know, we have a workforce that's leaving. So we talk a lot about that. That's a common theme when I talk to my members, right, and young government leaders. And I come from a different perspective. I am not a human capital expert, but I have seen a lot of these issues myself, and they've affected me personally. But what I want to talk about as what I see the biggest challenge in government right now is the government's inability to keep up with the ability to adapt. Change is happening all the time in all the aspects of the business that we do. And we haven't been good at keeping up with that change. We are not very adaptable. When you think about companies like Amazon, right? What did they do 10, maybe 15 years ago? They only sold books. That was it. What can you not find in Amazon today, right? They saw the need to adapt their business model. And I think government agencies are failing to realize that they may need to start changing or updating their business model. Our mission may remain the same, but we need to be able to keep up with the ever-changing needs of our community. And we cannot do that if we're not adapting at a fast pace. I mean, we talk about hiring people, right? And we talk about retention initiatives. Those won't be any good if your employees feel like their organization is always behind the curve. And I'm talking 10, 20, maybe 30 years behind the curve. And this is everything from hiring initiatives to how we do business. I mean, I work with equipment that is probably 20 years old. And that is part of the engagement. If you don't feel that you have the resources that you need and you don't feel like you have the ability to do your work in an efficient manner, that affects engagement, that affects retention. So those are the things that I believe HR also needs to be thinking about and be in more coordination with the leads of agencies, is understanding, yep, we're doing better things in hiring and retention. What are we doing to make sure that they feel like their agency is up to date with everything that they do? So it's not a matter of changing the mission. The mission is the same one. It's just making sure that we're delivering it in the way that meets the needs of the community. So those are the things that we talk about in Young Government Leaders. And just to make a really quick plug, because I have an audience here, Young Government Leaders, how many of you have heard of Young Government Leaders? Okay, that's good. But that's the thing, and you were talking about how sometimes we throw people in a cube and we just tell them good luck. They can't find a group of people that they can relate to. Groups like Young Government Leaders provide that. However, there isn't a way to communicate that to an agency, right? There's not a way for us to tell HR, tell them about Young Government Leaders. So we need to better communicate with those groups and actually point your employees to those groups that can provide that sense of community. And even though maybe outside of the agency, it is still providing a community of other young government leaders that are probably facing the same challenges.
Michelle, that's a great perspective, and it's a perfect lead-in, Dan, to talking about the GPO workforce. GPO's really become a much more technologically focused organization over the past decade. What are you doing to find and retain workforce that can match skills to mission?
Thank you, Terry. So to start out, as a Chief Human Capital Officer, I have to partner with the senior leadership and the managers of the agency to make all these changes happen. And human capital is a complex, complicated business. So what I did was I went to my partners and I said, how can I instill confidence in human capital and what we do? Because if I want to do things like, a strategic plan to address the generational diversity within the agency, I have to first convince the managers to buy into that plan, right? So what they came to me was let us hire better. We can't worry about all this other stuff, reskilling, strategic plans to address diversity issues and everything else, because I have empty seats and I need folks in here working. So we did that first, and we now have the confidence of our senior management and our managers. So I would say that first and foremost is, really fix the hiring process, take that primary worry from your managers and supervisors out of the picture. Provide good cert lists they have confidence in, and make sure they can hire. When they get a list of possible candidates, make sure when they look down that list, they believe they're the best qualified. So that's, and to kind of address the Amazon thing, so GPO's actually gone through that, which you kind of mentioned, Terry, was, I've been at GPO for 10 years. The first February that I was at GPO, when I came to work, there was news trucks. We own an entire block at the corner of G Street and North Capitol Street. There were news trucks around the entire block. Now, we're 5 blocks from the Capitol, right? And this was in 2009. And I thought, what is going on, right? Why are there so many news trucks here? But I was able to get into the building just fine. So anybody want to guess what happened that day? The budget came out. Exactly. Thank you. Somebody stood in those lines. We had pallets of paper copies of the president's budget up in our auditorium. Pallets. We had cash registers open because we're a business. We print for funds, right? So if your agency comes to us and asks us to print, you have to pay us money. That's how we stay open. And just pallets. We had folks there with carts to carry them out to their vehicles. So 7 years later, 3 years ago, President's budget was published and ready to sell. And we had just a couple folks show up in our little bookstore down on the corner to take pictures, really, for their news articles. So what changed? We took the federal budget and hundreds of thousands of authenticated federal documents and we put them online. That totally changed our business model, right? So, we went from selling this budget to now basically posting it online and you can get it for free, right? So we have done that. We have made that change, and we've seen our workforce demographics change as far as highly skilled blue-collar workers and white-collar workers. But we've also kind of benefited from the internet publishing in a way, because a lot of the print publishing the printing work in the private sector has gone out of business. They've diminished. So we're able to hire somebody that's 45, 50 years old to come in and start working on a bookbinder line or a print line, we don't have to train them. So our apprenticeship program went away, right? So now we're realizing, well, we're almost at the end of that workforce of hiring these highly skilled journey persons from the from the private sector, and now we have to go back to training them. So that's one. Generational diversity, which has already been mentioned. We definitely actually have to do a better job at that. That's one of our biggest concerns as well. And then digital literacy. So probably everybody here uses some type of Word product, right? Like Microsoft Word. So what do you really use Microsoft Word for? Right? A word processor, right? But it can do so much more. What we find is, and we actually do assessments, what we find is people that use Microsoft Word every day know about 20% of what Microsoft Word can do and how to use it. So digital literacy in the federal workforce, we really need to address that. I don't think we probably have that issue with folks that we hire under 30, but as we've mentioned, our workforce is more senior than that. So we really need to address that as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Those are great points. And so, Miguel, I want to turn to you as the Chief Diversity Inclusion Officer for the U.S. Coast Guard. Go Coast Guard. I have a daughter in the Coast Guard.
Awesome.
But our military forces have historically been much more diverse than the civilian side of our workforce. As we move towards a majority-minority demographic in the nation, what actions does the federal government need to take to be more intentional about improving the diversity of our federal workforce?
Absolutely. Good morning to everybody. The short way I will answer that is JEDI. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Often across government, we stay in diversity. I don't know about you, but every time you go to any organization, the first time that comes to mind when you start talking about diversity is about numbers. How many people are represented? So I have been in my current position for a little bit over a year, and I am the first civilian in history that sits in this particular position. So part of my main goal is to shift from the diversity conversation, which is important and representation will remain being important, but shifting to inclusion. It's paying attention to that workplace environment. You can have the latest computers. You can hire people quickly. But if you have a poor workplace environment, you will have poor results as an organization. So what I am doing is working with our top senior executives to pay attention to that workplace environment. How is our people feeling? Do they believe they belong in the organization? Do they feel respected? Do they feel that their skills, competencies are being used fully in the organization? So in the Coast Guard, we have been leading a transformational and historical D&I process. Early this year, we published a historical study on the retention of women in the Coast Guard. And while the results showed that our retention of women in the military is slightly higher than the other services, we know we're the greatest Coast Guard. That's what we say everywhere. But yet, there is space for improvement. So this particular study, which if you haven't read it, I highly encourage you to go to Google and search RAND Corporation Coast Guard Women Study, showed several findings, but one of the most powerful findings is the importance of the workplace environment. When minorities and women experience a bad interaction with poor leadership, that can be catastrophic in the career and in the retention of our top talent. So, JEDI. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. It is our time as HR leaders, as leaders in government, to transition from diversity to inclusion to justice and eventually equity.
Thank you for sharing that. And it's a great perspective. Yeah. So we're going to do one more pass through. There's typically a lot of agreement about the issues facing the federal workforce. I doubt you heard much here except for the JEDI term that you hadn't probably already been familiar with. But what often happens when we get into these conversations is that as soon as you transition to implementation, consensus breaks down. So what I want to do is go back through and have each of you tell us one particular practical step that you'd like to see government take and what it would take to accomplish that to get after the issues that you raised on the first side. So Michelle?
So I'll focus on the retention piece, and I think it's going to be a little bit of a repeat. So it's good. We're reinforcing the message from the employee engagement panel, and that's to look at your FEVS data. That data is so rich, so rich. At the partnership, we produce the best places to work in the government rankings every year, so we're really steeped in that data, and we're always looking across government. And question 41 on their survey, basically, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it basically says, like, do you believe, your agency is going to do anything with this data to make it a better place to work? Government-wide, only 37% of people believe that. Well, it's no wonder we can't retain anyone. Nobody believes their agencies are going to use the information they're providing. So dig into that data. The FEVS ART tool that Camille was talking about is a great tool. You can do focus groups, you can do pulse surveys, but you need to understand the voice of your employees if you want to keep them. And like I said, this is something that all your employees take every year. It's out there. Agencies just don't do enough to dig into it. So that is my biggest piece of advice. Take the information that you already get and actually use it and do something with it. And then the other one, which is kind of an easy one, is exit and stay interviews. It's shocking to me how many agencies don't utilize either one of those tools. If you want to find out why people are leaving, you need to ask them. So just take some time to figure out a process for making sure you're digging into the reasons why people are leaving your agency so that you can make it a better place to work.
Thanks. Michelle?
So I think the reason is because we have gotten really good at admiring the problem, not really looking for solutions for the problem. And that's why we get stuck in the problem. One thing, and just sticking with the theme of adaptation, innovation, and government, is I would like to see every agency kind of stand up an innovation warrior group, right? Or an innovation hub and lab. I know there are some agencies that have actually done this. And what I see in this type of group is people within government that are looking at the entire business model of the agency, from hiring and retention, diversity and inclusion, to actually the business that they're doing, whatever that is, if it's delivering a product or a capability, and understanding how is that agency doing with regards to how they're keeping up with change, how they're keeping up with innovation, and actually implementing new things. I think a lot of agencies just don't know where to start, so a group like this can help them do that. Now, if you want to have a group like this, you will need the talent within government, and that is often the problem. I believe we need to make more partnerships with private industry to do the same that we do with the other agencies. We do a lot of details, right? We send you to another agency where you're probably going to deal with the same issues that you dealt in your other agency. You may learn a thing or two, but I think there's a lot of value in actually allowing a government employee to spend some time with the private industry. Get them trained in something, let them be in that environment for a period of time, and then bring them back. And you're gonna see just how much change that person can help implement in the agency because they've lived it and they've actually gotten trained in it. So I think government needs to be better at that. They need to embrace a model that allows people to actually go somewhere and come back to the government easily, which I don't think we were able to do that right now. So those are my 2 cents.
Great, thank you. Dan?
Well, I want to start saying on kind of with what Michelle was saying several years ago. We're a legislative branch, so we do not have to do the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. How many of you all knew that, right? Yeah. So anyways, we participated. Our director at the time wanted to participate. We actually took a year break between them because we could. And that year, so it was 2 years before they were taking the survey again. And during that 2-year period, we really focused on addressing it, because that 1 year cycle, by the time you get the results, you know, when do you get the results? December? And then the next survey's June? That's a lot of work to do in just a few months, right? So we took that 2 years, and what I did is actually called the partnership and talked to them, and they gave me a lot of data. And so what I found out was, if you pay attention to it, it improves. It's that simple, really. Just pay attention to it, and it improves. And it did. It was like magic. And if you notice, like years ago, Secretary Hood, I believe, over at Transportation, really focused on the employee viewpoint survey. Then he left. And when he left, the numbers started dropping because the new head of that agency, the new secretary, probably didn't put that much emphasis on it. I don't know. But I just want to say it works, and that is a good. Gosh, they've already said everything. I'm going to go back to my hiring. If you really want to diversify your workforce, you have to fix the way we hire. OPM has done that. On September 13th, they published a memo kind of laying out some things that have been out there all the time that most of the agencies aren't using. And hopefully we'll start doing that. And then, since I have a plug here in public, and maybe somebody from OPM will hear this, get rid of the self-assessment. It is absolutely, so the folks that know what to do, 100 points. The folks that don't know what to do, you know, they don't exaggerate, they don't even get on the list. So, you know, someone coming right out of college, you know, looking for an entry level into the federal workforce, you know, unless they mark all E's, what's going to happen, right? We're never even going to see them. So get rid of self-assessment. I believe that single thing alone and find a suitable replacement would make a huge difference.
That's a good point. Miguel?
So Terry, I believe that teams and organizations stop growing when leaders stop growing. So if I do one thing, and that's our focus, is focusing on our managers, is equipping them to better implement solutions at the unit level to create workplace environments that are engaging, that are inclusive, and that are founded in belonging. So in the Coast Guard, we literally, like 1 week ago, we awarded a historical contract to implement 6 new initiatives. One of the initiatives is the creation of a 6-month certification to create a cadre of certified D&I practitioners and coaches. So we're going to create an army of 125 individuals that will be certified, just similar to Georgetown, Harvard University, and Cornell, to develop D&I initiatives across the organization. In the Coast Guard, we have approximately 825 unit leaders. These coaches and certified D&I practitioners will focus on them, in helping them understand the FEVS data, the OAS data, and over 6 different survey instruments, is helping them translate that to actions and behaviors. So focusing on our managers, I believe, will bring a high return on investment.
Great point. So you guys have all given us really important things to think about. I am cognizant of the fact that we are the panel that's between you and the networking break, and the clock is at 0. But does anyone have any questions that you want to raise for the folks that are up on stage? No, coffee is back in the back room. We'll take a break. Thank you. No? Oh, sorry. Connie's coming up. Hold on.